So many analysts here say this is more than just another G7. There are a lot of expectations. Will it have a roadmap for peace? Now, peace between Ukraine and Russia, one part of the story, Israel and Iran, another part of the story. And of course, will there be a cautious optimism, as some may argue, between India and Canada? Will the relationship return on an even keel? I have special guests joining me on the broadcast. I want to bring in Kushal Mehra, Indo-Canadian author and podcaster. Spends about 6 months here in Canada and 6 months in India. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Wonderful. Let me also bring into this conversation Ambassador Veena Sikri, former top diplomat, and Michael Kugelman, South Asia Director for the Woodrow Wilson Center. Kushal, to you first. What do we expect from the Prime Minister's visit? First G7 and then India-Canada.
Well, considering the where things had gone under Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh's government, I think this is a welcome development. Mark Carney has done the right thing by calling the Prime Minister. But while it's a good first step, we have to be very cautious. India-Canada relations are always about cautious optimism. And because you never know when things go south in Canada.
Yep.
Because you have to understand Canada as a country. Canada as a country lives in the shadow of America. America has things that it tangibly boasts about. So Canada always lives in that shadow. So performative outrage is the thing in Canada. So all groups that are very good at performative outrage tend to have a very disproportionate hold on the Canadian body politic. So we should not underestimate that. So that's why I would say my first opening remarks would be cautious optimism, but we are seeing all the right signs here.
We see the right signs, and yesterday when we were here on the streets of Calgary, we noticed some of these separatist elements, the Khalistani elements, they were baying for the Prime Minister's blood. What would you make of that? Is that still seen as freedom of expression?
Yeah, which is very interesting, right? Forget what's happening in Calgary. I think it was day before yesterday or yesterday on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. We had people going with Khalistan flags and kirpans. Now, let me tell you, if it was a truckers' protest, they would not allow that to happen on the Parliament Hill. But this is a serious issue here in Canada. Under the garb of free speech, a lot of ridiculous things are being allowed. Because the thing is that they would not allow the majority community of Canada to get away with anything like this.
Yeah.
The only reason these separatist groups are allowed to spew is, I think, somewhere inside the Canadian system, they think they'll be called racists. And the separatists actually know that very well, and they take advantage of that. So they keep using the free speech argument. It's not. I think the Khalistan element, as far as India, Canada is concerned, is a geopolitical tool. You know, it's like a negotiating card when you're playing. You know, this is a card I have on the table. I have these people with me. But that was, that used to work maybe when India was a smaller economy. Now we are the fourth largest economy in the world, going to be the third largest in 3 years or so. You really should not be doing that. Like, we should be talking about trade. And I'm glad Carney has invited Prime Minister Modi. I think it's the right thing to do.
Let me take this to Michael Kugelman for a moment. Kushal, stay with me for a moment. Michael Kugelman, how do you view this? Prime Minister Narendra Modi being invited to G7 and also the issue. So let's take both one by one. Let's take the issue of US President not signing off on that agreement right now, asking Israel to back down. G7 countries not on the same page?
This is going to be an issue that looms very large over the summit. And of course, that could not have been anticipated because going into it, there were so many other issues like the Ukraine war that were figured to be high on it. But this is going to be something that'll be very difficult to avoid. And indeed, President Trump has, signaled he'd like the two sides to not be fighting anymore. And I suspect that that's also a view that the Indian government, the Indian Prime Minister, would want to see as well. But if you look at this in the context of the broader G7 membership, there's some issues that'll have to be worked out. But there's going to be a lot of issues on the table, and I think that another issue looming over everything will be President Trump's tariff policies. I mean, this is something that clearly has impacted all of the other countries present there, including India. And given that the G7 and the G7 members and other countries that have been invited to participate, they all want to focus on how to strengthen the global economy and look at how to provide economic assistance and investment and so on. But this is an issue that comes back to the Trump administration's views on America first and the need for countries to buy American products and invest in the US. So there may be a bit of a disconnect there. That'll have to be worked out among the G7 members and the other leaders present at the proceedings.
And Ambassador Sikri, does that appear possible given the worldview of President Trump and other leaders are virtually poles apart? Though some reports seem to indicate that leaders really do not want to rub Trump the wrong way too much.
Yeah, well, I think one has to look at the G7 summit at many different levels. And one level is exactly what my co-panelists have just said, that there are huge differences on issues like tariff, on issues like the Iran-Israel conflict, the Israel-Hamas conflict, the Ukraine-Russia conflict. There's so many differences of opinion that already, even before the summit has started, Prime Minister Mark Carney has said there will not be a joint statement. There will be just be a summary of what has been discussed. So obviously, their differences seem clearly, even before the discussion has started, seem very wide and difficult to overcome. But this is a complete time of geopolitical flux. A complete geopolitical churn is taking place. And I think it's very important that our Prime Minister is going to be there. And I think Prime Minister Mark Carney was very gracious in what he said, that the reason for inviting our Prime Minister, you cannot have the fifth, soon to be the fourth largest economy in the world, not being present at a meeting of G7, which talks about the 7 largest industrialized countries in the world. So our Prime Minister's presence is very important for several issues. One is, of course, the issue of the world economy, the state of flux, the supply chains, the technology, the energy. I think the other issue which our Prime Minister will want to talk about a lot is counter-terrorism. It is his first visit abroad after Operation Sindoor, and I think he have this very much on his mind to explain to each of his interlocutors and to the meeting as a whole the issue of counterterrorism and India's very, very strong commitment, the new normal that our Prime Minister spoke about in India. And certainly he will take this message of the new normal across there to the G7. I think the third level is the bilaterals. The bilaterals that are going to take place between our Prime Minister and Prime Minister Mark Carney. I think there will be a reset in Indo-Canadian ties, definitely, perhaps an exchange of ambassadors. And I think certainly the fact that Prime Minister Mark Carney has talked about the law enforcement agencies of both sides interacting on the vexatious issues that have bedeviled the relationship for the last couple of years, that has given a more normal status to the discussions on this issue. And both sides will look at each and every so-called credible allegation and answer on it. So I think that our Prime Minister being there on all these 3 levels, he will have.
So let's take these two. Let's take these two separately. Okay, you've raised 2 very pertinent points that I want to touch upon with Kushal also and Michael Kugelman also. One is Operation Sindoor and India explaining our position. Now, is there, in your appreciation, Michael Kugelman, likely to be a pushback from either Europe or the United States on India's Operation Sindoor and India's pushback on American double standards, standing with the state sponsor of radical Islamist terror, Pakistan?
India will have the full sympathy of the U.S. and other Western capitals, and indeed, I would assume those present at the G7 summit, particularly the members of the G7, sympathy and support for India's concerns about terrorism. I mean, this is a position that has received support from Washington and other Western capitals for quite some time. I mean, as we know, where the difference lies is that as that conflict became escalated, the concern in much of the West turned to escalation concerns about nuclear escalation risks, and then the focus shifted away from the terrorist attack that provoked the conflict or provoked the crisis, which then turned into a conflict. But I think that if I suspect that Prime Minister Modi will meet with President Trump during the G7, and I suspect that the Prime Minister will bring to the attention of President Trump India's concerns about terrorism, and I think that President Trump will be very receptive to that. I should say that there will be an opportunity for the two leaders to clear the
Okay.
air in a U.S.-India relationship that has faced a few bumps post-ceasefire, given the messaging coming from President Trump. But what I'd say to that as well is that there's very serious trade
Yes.
negotiations going on between the U.S. and India right now. And I think that if both leaders can meet and say, well, let's get through the final step and get to an agreement on this trade deal, that could be a big confidence building measure for the U.S. and India, can help smooth over some of these tensions that have crept into the relationship in recent weeks.
Alternatively, it would also appear that the Americans are not as trustworthy as the Americans make themselves out to be. When they claim to be India's friend, and then they seem to treat Pakistan, the perpetrator and victim of terror, on the same footing, and yet would want to be friends with both.
I think it's time for India to give Trump a plane. Maybe that's what will make me happy. But as far as trustworthiness is, I think it's easier to deal with a transactional America as far as India is concerned, is my view. I think transactional foreign policy in any way is transactional.
Yes.
It was just that, the West came up with this charade of liberal, global, world democratic order. Everybody was transactional. The Americans were always transactional. India has always said that we have a non-alignment policy.
Or a multi-aligned policy.
Multi-aligned policy. I mean, it's about time we do that. With Trump, I think, I don't know, I still feel Trump would be a lot easier to deal with than probably a Democrat, because Trump is so openly transactional.
Sure.
If you say no, he'll be like, oh, so they won't do it, I guess. I feel it's easier. Is it ideal? No, but it's never supposed to be ideal. Was it ideal with Biden? It was not, right? So it's like this.
Let me take that to Ambassador Sikri. Ambassador Sikri, your appreciation of Operation Sindoor, because America clearly would want to keep Pakistan on their side, and fair enough, they may want to do that, but at the same time, you can't be friends both of the perpetrator of terror and victim of terror and treat them both, with the same brush or on an equal footing.
Well, I think that first of all, this opportunity to say this directly to President Trump is very important, and the bilateral would really put everything in focus. That's very important, and I think that explaining this directly to the G7 as well, because our Prime Minister will be speaking to them, and to tell them that you cannot, equate the perpetrator and the victim of terror, and also that you cannot, benefit the perpetrator by giving him, huge benefits from the IMF, from the ADB, and possibly even from the World Bank going ahead. So I think all these issues have to come out clearly, because this issue of terrorism is affecting the whole world. And everybody is being sympathetic, but everybody then hedges when you come to name the person because of these very special considerations. But I think occasions like this really do draw, because we do know that there are other very important countries of the global south there, Indonesia and Brazil and so on. And the bilaterals with them will also bring this out clearly. So I think these important issues coming up and possibly getting in agreement among all the people on these issues is very valuable for India. This opportunity is a very valuable one, because it also links with what we want to do with America on trade. As you said, we will talk about the bilateral trade agreement, and with the other members of the G7. We have been reaching out to Europe in a big way. Our Prime Minister just coming after a visit to Cyprus, which is, on issues like Cyprus's forthcoming presidency of the EU, and also about IMEC and so many other issues. So we are looking at multiple ways. Our policy of strategic autonomy, of multi-alignment, has really shown its value, has shown the strength of this multi-alignment and, the economy. But this has carried us through the day, and we now have all these additional members to speak to. And of course, we very much value our relationship with America, and we do hope that the bilateral between our Prime Minister and President Trump will certainly clear the air and carry it forward in a stronger way.
Okay. What about India, Canada? You've spoken of cautious optimism. Do we expect action on Khalistani elements, or neither America nor Canada will act against the Pannus and the others on their territory?
Well, it's a complicated answer, and we have to segregate what the Americans will do from what the Canadians might do. As far as the Americans are concerned, maybe Pannu might not be touched, but we clearly see movement on the Khalistani front. First of all, we have to understand that Khalistan is no longer a separatist movement. It's a drug cartel.
Yeah.
It's a combination of crime, human trafficking, drug peddling, all those kinds of things.
Which is impacting these countries worse than
Worse.
India.
Yeah, so that is point number one. We have to look at it in the correct manner. So, in that sense, the Trump administration actually has done a pretty decent job of catching a lot of these drug peddling elements. I think Pannu's rhetoric has died down a lot compared to when Biden and Trudeau were in office. As far as Mark Carney is concerned, we can only judge him by what he has done till now. We have not seen Mark Carney with any Khalistani flags. That it's a matter of fact. We cannot deny facts. So that he stayed away from them. What happens in the future over here, we can only judge over a period of time. The thing is that Canada has things that India wants to buy. Canada has one of the largest solar